Poland, Warsaw, July 1944. It has been 5 years since the outbreak of World War II, and Poland has been under German occupation since the 6th of October 1939. The occupation was anything but benign, and already Warsaw, the once grand city of Poland, had been brought to a mere shadow of its former self, with labour camps and concentration camps established, and hundreds of thousands of Polish Jews, gypsies, and other Gruns deemed Untermensch by the Germans were sent to their deaths. But despite the horrors the occupied city had seen, and the harsh oppression it faced, resistance still rose to meet it, and now, with the Eastern Front falling back as the onslaught of the Red Army pushed the Germans, shelling could be heard in the streets of Warsaw. Liberation was close at hand. The underground resistance known as the Polish Home Army, however, did not intend to let the Red Army liberate Poland and return to the Poles whatever land they saw fit under whichever government they chose. No, the liberation of Warsaw must come from the Polish themselves, and so the Polish Home Army decided it shall. This Polish Home Army comprised of a few remaining soldiers who had survived the Battle of Poland, a volunteer militia, and the strongest yet most tragic of them, the Grey Ranks. These were scouts, no older than 18. The older scouts were frontline fighters, and the younger ones couriers and medics. They were young, but they were fierce, and made up most of the fighters during the uprising. So just remember, when I talk about the events that occurred, they are fought between highly trained German Wehrmacht and Polish kids. And another note, as I'm writing my script for this video, it is August the 6th, and the celebrations of the Warsaw Uprising are in full effect in Warsaw. I thought now would be one of the best times to cover this tragic tale, especially considering one of my friends is currently there, partaking in some of the commemorative activities, but this video is taking a lot longer than I expected, so yeah, this is going to be way past the time. Anyway, back to the video. August 1st, 1944, the beginning of the uprising. The Warsaw Uprising had been planned for a long time. Ever since German boots first marched into the city, Polish minds had been planning how to kick them back out. And so, when the Red Army drew closer to Warsaw, the PHA decided now was the time. The last time the Red Army had been this close to the capital, it had been during the dual invasion of Germany and Russia, and the Polish were not going to let the Russians take all the credit for the liberation. The Russians had not even recognized the Polish government in exile, and the PHA decided the only way they would have any sort of country after the war was if they fought for it now and liberated themselves. And so, on August 1st, 1944, W hour was declared. The Polish troops had planned for a surprise attack at dawn, but at the last minute, plans changed. No longer was the attack planned for the morning, it was now planned for 5 p.m. But this was not easy to accomplish. Turns out, telling 40,000 troops that you have to delay for a few hours was pretty difficult, and many resistance members were nowhere near where they were supposed to be, causing massive supply issues and much less cohesion than planned. Despite this, the first day of the uprising went as well as it could have. In just a few hours of fighting, 2/3 of the city were liberated. They had managed to capture the gasworks, the waterworks, the power plants, and even some production facilities, but they had not managed to cut off the railways, airports, or even a few of the key roads. Another issue that arose was that many of the pockets of resistance couldn't connect, and even inside the pockets of Polish resistance was more German resistance, and even worse, the rising in the Praga side of the Vistula was crushed entirely, making Soviet help even more unlikely. But, as a bonus, they had managed to capture a number of cemeteries, which would make great landing spots for the Polish Independent Parachute Brigade, which would help shore up defences and would desperately be needed. Hey. Where are they? We are supposed to be in Warsaw. It is part of the plan. Oh, we have something planned, alright. More important than the liberation of my city? Oh, I think this operation will be quite the event. What operation? Oh boy, do I have a plan for you? No, not you. Get off my screen. Not you. This is not your video. Go to hell. Okay, where were we? Oh right, the uprising. The second day rolls by, and General Komorowski managed to make communication with the Allies, and was promised major supply drops. But as day after day passed, no supply drops came, until one day, when a few planes dropped much needed relief. The strange thing about these planes, they bore the Polish insignia. These planes were flown by Poles, who had, against orders, flown to aid their Polish comrades. Many did not even have enough fuel to fly back. On the whole, the uprising had been effective, and the Poles had only to wait until the Russians arrived, or until the Allies could reinforce them. But then, the bombs began falling. The Luftwaffe ran bombing run after bombing run, without discrimination. Civilian, resistance fighter, no one was safe. With no way to combat the Air Force, century-old buildings were destroyed, and casualties rose astronomically. On day 4, the true atrocities began. Himmler ordered a door-by-door massacre. No mercy was shown. Men, women, children, sick or wounded, it did not matter. In 1 week, tens of thousands of civilians were killed while huddling in their homes. But this did nothing to stop the Polish resistance. No, it strengthened it. Now it was clear. To not side with the resistance meant only death. On the second week, the Germans managed to split the main Polish holdout in two. The city centre and the old town were now separated. So, how did the Polish overcome this seemingly deadly strike? By using the sewers. The sewers spanned the entire length of the city and were used to shuffle troops undetected from Old Town and the city centre. On another front, the resistance pushed so far into the German lines they managed to liberate a German concentration camp. The 384 Jews who had managed to survive the extermination quickly raised arms against their oppressors, who had murdered everyone they knew. But by the third week, and despite their best efforts, Old Town had been shelled to oblivion, and Komorowski ordered an evacuation. But they couldn't use the sewers to shuffle all the fighters out, and so they made a desperate push and broke through to the city centre. But as civilians rushed through the breach, the attack stalled, and the Germans retook the area. Only the units closest to the breach had managed to get through, and the rest would have to attempt the sewers. But finally, the Soviet army reached the Vistula on the 15th of September, and a crossing was made. But the Soviets only sent the poorly equipped light infantry of the Polish volunteer force, and were massacred. The Soviets declared no more attempts would be made, and no aid would be given to the Polish partisans. Finally, the Americans managed to make a proper airdrop of supplies, but 80% of it was dropped behind German lines. They will not try again. The Polish were shelled relentlessly, and any remaining buildings became target practice for the Germans. German tanks bombarded defences that were only manned by fighters with rifles. The Germans advance on the Mokotów district. The resistance is pushed back. They enter a field hospital and massacre everyone inside, including staff. The Poles only control a few buildings right against the banks of the Vistula. They could see the Red Army on the other side, but knew no aid would come. They were starving, outgunned and outnumbered, and still they fought. Every inch of the city became a bunker, any building a fortress. If the Germans were going to take the city, it would be paid for in blood, but the outcome was inevitable. The Germans, now more concerned about the Soviet threat, offered terms. The entire population of Warsaw was to be expelled, but no one would be killed. And so, the resistance members spent their last days forging documents for their Jewish members. 15,000 of the Home Army became prisoners of war, 500,000 civilians were expelled, 60,000 left in the death camps, and 90,000 forced into forced labour camps. And after this, Hitler declared the city must be destroyed, and no trace of it be allowed remain on the earth. And so, for the next 3 months, the Germans methodically and systematically destroyed building after building, block by block. So, 3 months later, when the Soviet army finally crossed, 85% of the buildings had been levelled. If you go to Warsaw today, just know, all the old buildings are recreations from pictures, models and paintings. And in the rubble of that city lay 70% of the grey ranks, the true fighters of Poland. But their sacrifice was not in vain, for their nation still stands, long after the enemy that nearly destroyed them was destroyed itself.